And you're probably going, who are these people? Where's Brandon? Where's Carson? So let me fill in the blanks here. I'm Tom. Brandon will be here momentarily. He's seen on the tarmac at Atlanta Airport. So I would suspect that we'll see him in 15, 20 minutes or so. Christy, who you were it was your third and a half time, I
This is
think
my
now,
third and a half time. Yeah.
is filling in for Carson this week, who is in the Caribbean on a cruise and making us all jealous on LinkedIn. And we have another great guest today, Bill Kirst. Bill, welcome.
Thank you. Appreciate being here, Tom, and great to meet you, Christy. Long-time listener, first-time caller, so to speak.
I love
Glad to be
it.
here.
Yeah. So, Bill, we're going to talk about AI and really AI in sales and sales enablement and a lot of, I think, practical aspects of using AI with sales. We have a lot to talk about. So let's start off, if you can, tell us a little bit about your background, what you do, and kind of how you got into this whole AI thing.
Sure. Yeah, I appreciate that, Tom. So my background's kind of interesting, and a lot of people here may be a little surprised to hear. I'm an expert in change management. I focus on the people side of change, and I've been doing that for over 2 decades. And what's really interesting, Tom, you and I were talking pre-show about this. If I step back and think about most of my career, the people I've partnered with the most in all of my career of sort of delivering change, selling change, supporting organizations through change are sellers, ironically. And people might be surprised by that because they'd say, okay, well, if you focus on the human side, the people side of change, most of it's probably around HR stuff. Not necessarily. I mean, most of what's driven our change over the past 2 decades has been technology specific. And if you fast forward to where we're at today, AI is the topic du jour. What once was, if we all can remember, and hopefully some folks that listen to this will remember, when the World Wide Web came out, it completely altered the way that people do business. And a lot of people were thinking, well, how am I going to integrate this into my life? And so the people that usually show up to help you with that are change management experts. So I had about 2 decades of experience in consulting. Worked at places like Bearing Point and IBM. Went to work for the University of Washington for a while. I actually led their first cloud implementation to Workday. So they were moving all of their systems from a 35-year-old payroll system, which was green screen, blinking cursor, to their first cloud instance. And I led that change. Then went back to consulting for about 6 years, started a change management practice for a company called West Monroe, was the first person to lead that practice in Seattle. And then Microsoft called me. They actually heard my podcast, which I've been running a podcast for about 8 years called Coffee and Change, where I interview people just like this and ask them how they've led change in their life, in their work, and in the world. They heard that podcast and said, hey, can you come do what you do for us and focus on customer zero, focus on helping our sellers get into a consultative mindset, and also help us focus on career tracks and career paths for people. And I said, it's not every day you get a call from Microsoft. So I said, yes. What's interesting is I had already been following Carson Hetty and all of his work prior to that. I was a fanboy for a long time. And then I realized, oh, wow, I get to work with Carson and many others. So while I was at Microsoft, I was a director of change for commercial systems and business intelligence. Long title, basically means anytime there was a change to something inside a system that Microsoft employees used, a process, a policy, they would come to my team and say, help us make this work. So I got some really amazing exposure to how the entire Microsoft stack works, as well as rolled out some impressive tools and AI tools for 60,000 sellers across the Microsoft ecosystem. And just last year in August, I joined Adobe, and I'm doing a lot of the same stuff for Adobe, leading a lot of change focused on the AI aspects of our day-to-day lives. So that's how I got here today. And then separate from that, I was also in the Army for 12 years. I was a captain in the Signal Corps. So I was a cybersecurity battle captain, technically, and an aide de camp to 3 different generals. So I've had a couple of lifetimes.
Yeah, wow. You don't look that old.
Lots of sleep and lots of water. That's the trick.
Christy, we talked a lot last week when you were on the show, right, about how you're working with, people and helping them, find jobs and find the right job and the right opportunity. Mm-hmm. Have you seen a lot of concern, or what do you see as it relates to when you talk to salespeople about AI and the change, if you want to call it that, with AI? Do
Mhm.
you see a lot of concern, a lot of, are they leaning into it or are they trying to run away from it?
Yeah, good question. A little so with the people that I'm interviewing for clients, they're talking about using it as, as an efficiency tool. But when you snoop around LinkedIn, there's definitely a lot of fear and uncertainty around which sales jobs might be automated and disappear and which ones might have legs. And I think as a result of that, there are a lot of sellers who are looking to level up. I guess I'll use that term, because I think we all think that perhaps the SDR role might be able to be moved over to an automated state with AI. A lot of the efficiency type things. And again, I'm pro efficiency for sure. And I'm just kind of sitting back. In fairness, I'm not really voting yet. I'm kind of sitting back to see. But what I do like that I'm hearing on social about this topic is, hey, if you're gonna be replaceable if you're not at the top 10%, which Tom, I spend a lot of time talking about the top 10 percenters and how they're separating themselves out. And I think this is one of those things where, hey, if you're hitting 60 or 70% of quota, and and they think you can replace it with AI. I think that's one thing. And then the other thing I would throw out, and then I've got a question for Bill as well, is as someone who consults for SaaS B2B companies, I think everybody better be heads up that as we continue to use AI as an efficiency tool more and more, that's possible, right? Like if you have 150 of this type of employee today, you may only need 70 of this employee tomorrow. And if you're selling B2B licenses as opposed to a solution, if you're still doing a seat license, if you will, you're going to be in big trouble because all of a sudden they're going to need half as many licenses as they did. And now what does that do to your revenue? So,
Hmm.
Bill, my question for you would be, again, I was curious about the change management too.
Yeah.
And because apathy is the number one reason why people don't buy, and
Yeah.
I spend a lot of time even talking to sales teams and sales leaders about how are you helping them reduce the risk into it where change management comes in, right? Like
Hmm.
I see very few companies providing, I just call them change management packets,
Yeah.
right? Like in saying like, hey, we're going to switch the vendor or we're going to bring in something new for the very first time. You've got to train everybody. Like, I'm like, I think the best companies are giving them email templates that say, hey, this is what's happening. This is what's coming. But tell me about your thoughts on apathy,
Yeah.
the connection between not purchasing due to apathy and change management.
Yeah, well, I'll start off by saying, kind of the counter to apathy is empathy, and that's actually my greatest skill set. If you think about, you've taken those strength finders and those tests, a lot of times we sort of anchor in what is our key skill, and I've always indexed number one on empathy. And for me, the best part of that is exactly what you're saying, which is standing in the shoes of those that I'm trying to support, those that I'm trying to help grow, get better, win, whatever the objective is. And for me, I think apathy and sort of inertia is one of your biggest risks in an organization currently.
Mhm.
I will also say on top of that is people feel overwhelmed, right? The volume of stuff coming at them, the decisions being asked of them to make in shorter time periods, do more with less headcount, more responsibilities. These are these are a lot of pressure points for a lot
Points.
of leaders and
Mhm.
managers. And one thing I notice because I get to interact with all these leaders and support them is they're lonely. They're truly lonely in this. And they feel like, hey, if I could get some support and get some help, and sometimes that support, as you said, Christy, looks like I'm going to listen to you and understand what your challenges and problems are. And I'm actually going to, rather than just throw a solution at you, right? I'm not just going to throw a tool at you. I'm actually going to understand how you work, what you're trying to achieve and accomplish under the constraints of the environment that you're in, and I'm going to make a recommendation that suits you. So I'm going to try and stand in your shoes, and guide you through it. I used to call it when I worked at IBM, I used to call it at the elbow, meaning I would work with a lot of leaders and executives, and they didn't like when you stood behind them, right? Imagine we're all trying to learn a new tool. If I stand behind you and I look at your screen, it makes you nervous, right? Your sort of
Right.
defenses go up. Don't. So I would actually go off to the side and sort of stand at the elbow, So you're not directly behind them. They can still see you in their peripheral vision. And this seems simple, but it's pretty profound, where they feel like you're supporting them, and you're not in their space. And I think a lot of times that analogy is very true with what we're doing with tools, systems, technology. And I like to do my best to sort of show up to meet people where they need the support. And in the absence of good communications, in the absence of empathy, and the absence of curiosity, you get a lot of people who just stop trusting. They stop trusting what's happening in the organization. They stop trusting the selling cycles. They stop understanding who their customers are. And that gap becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. So throwing new things at it, digital, will not shorten that gap. What shortens that gap is relationships.
So what I'm hearing you say, and I want to bring up this question from Bob, or this actually comment from Bob on the
Mhm.
comment here in a minute. What I'm hearing you say, Bill, is that change, as much as anything else, is that giving the hug, I guess, and the
Yeah.
care and feeding
Yes.
to help people through that process.
Yeah.
So it's not so much like, here's the training, here's how you use the software, here's the manual, or here's a video, or whatever the case may be. It's somebody feeling like they have that guidance and that support along the way, which is really interesting, I think.
Yeah, and it's not always our first go-to, right? I know a lot of times, especially in technology or even in sales, depending on the environment you're in, we sometimes feel like, oh, I can't show up that way. I can't ask an open-ended question, because if I ask an open-ended question, they're going to think I know less than I should know,
Hmm.
and they're not going to buy from me.
Hmm.
And I've listened to many episodes that you all have done, and we've had discussions. Carson and I have had discussions around this. That sort of open-ended question allows for inquiry, curiosity, relationship building, and you can wonder into a potential solution, as opposed to say, "Oh, I listened to one third of what you said, and you need this."
Right.
And then what ends up happening is they buy this, and they expect it to do that, and it doesn't. And then you're starting all over again, and you're now on the bottom of their list of who to call. Whereas if you'd spend a little bit of time with them to really understand and sort of give them, for lack of a better term, a mental hug and kind of get to know them, they will remember you. They'll be like, hey, you know what? Tom made me feel great. I know we didn't necessarily arrive at that point where we signed a proposal that day, but I really liked how Tom made me feel. So I'm going to call Tom when the opportunity comes up. And then I'm
Mhm.
going to call Christy and say, I want to work with you both for these reasons. And then you don't have to spend so much time with the
Yep.
chase.
Yeah. And what I'm hearing you say is, if they believe that, again, if you're a vendor or a seller, if they believe that you actually do have empathy and it certainly then justifies consultative selling, but it's
Yeah.
not just consultative selling like, hey, I did a discovery call and I think you need this. It's actually caring about what they're going to go through in that organization, which is a little bit of a different thing than just the technology part of it. I want to hit a couple of these comments here because,
Please.
um, and Brandon says he's walking off the plane, but he's been listening. So let's see. Um, and Christy, I don't know, are you getting attacked? Because we all of a sudden hear more cicadas all of a sudden. So I
Oh,
hope
you
you're
do? No, no. I'm safe. I'm safe. I'm in a screened-in
okay.
porch.
All
I'm
right,
safe.
good. So Bob brought up a question here. He said change management. Again, Bill, you do a lot with sales organizations, right?
Hmm.
Change management is often driven more by the churn in the sales leadership. Hey, a new CRO, a new CMO, a new whatever, new leader change.
Hmm.
What's your take on that aspect of it, is the change of the people and the personnel and the management?
Yeah, I think Bob is right. A lot of times we say to ourselves, what is the event that triggers the need to manage the change? And what I would encourage people to think about differently is, don't wait for that, oh, it's too late event, or don't wait for that, somehow we have to play catch up because we have a new leader, or there's a risk issue, or there might even be a crisis. I mean, think about all the organizations that have cybersecurity events that take place because they had to react, right? Because it was too late. When I think about managing change and guiding change and leading change, I believe personally, and I have 25 years of experience to say this, it really behooves you to invest in it in such a way so that those things that Bob is talking about, those natural occurrences, those continuity things, they just become part of your rhythm. And it's not so brittle. The organization's not so
Hmm.
brittle when it happens. If there's a new CRO or a new piece of technology comes in, you really want to get it so that your workforce is adept at this, right? It's kind of like going to physical therapy. The analogy I often give people when they say, "What do you do?" I'm a doctor for businesses. And many times it's like going to physical therapy. If you come and you do your stretches and you do your exercises, it's going to get easier. But if you tell your physical therapist, "Yeah, I'm doing my stretches, I'm good," and then you show up and they go to stretch you, it's going to hurt. And I think organizations are no different. We are just a collection of humans. We have to remember that, right? Business, the word is busyness, and we are a collection of humans as an organization. So it just gets more complex when you don't build that muscle for change, which is why I'm excited. I've gotten to work at the places I've worked because they've invested in that muscle and
Yeah.
that core capacity. It's also why I love partnering with sellers because let's be clear, they pay my bills, right? Oftentimes, Bob, you know this and others know this. It is change management is considered overhead and it is an internal investment. The So if you're successful as sellers, then I'm happy because that pays my bills. That keeps me gainfully employed, which is why it's very, very key to meet the sellers right away. It's kind of like in the army. The first thing you do is you meet the person that pays your bill, says your pay, and who gives you the food. You become friends with those two people. It's not
Right
that
away.
different here.
Bill, I've got a follow-up question for you.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go ahead and put some words in your mouth. So empathy is your superpower, your universal superpower. And I teach how to find your sales superpower. So I have created this little 5-step model. I'll run through it real quickly with you, and then I have my question. So you have to identify it,
Yeah.
right? Then you have to develop it, and development happens naturally. Developing something happens when you are using it, like you said, using the muscle regularly, and then it just is going to get a little bit better. But then the next step is to hone it, and hone it is an intentional step, right?
Yeah.
Honing something is intentionally working on doing it, and then you have to pressure test it, and then you have to, put it into play in the right circumstances. But let's go to honing for a minute. So,
Sure.
assuming that, so how did empathy become your superpower, and how did you hone it?
Yeah, I think empathy became my superpower because I'm one of 6 kids. I was raised in a family of 6 children. My mom was the oldest of 10. I always had people around me and community around me. And I had to take care of 3 younger siblings when I was growing up. And just due to life circumstances, you start to care about other people in your stead, if you will, in your care. And early on, I started to realize that it helped not only those I cared about, but it helped me. It helped me sleep better. It helped me feel more at peace, which allowed me to then show up to whatever challenge or problem arose the next day more with a sense of peace of mind and a sense of belief that I could help. Fast forward a little bit, I lived all over the world. You can see behind me, there's the very famous Checkpoint Charlie sign. The reason that's there is because I lived in Eastern Europe for about 8 years behind the Iron Curtain growing up. And over the course of my life, I've had the opportunity to learn 6 or 7 languages. And to me, language and words, they matter because words make worlds. And the investment for me of learning other language allowed me to get closer, to your point, hone in on understanding what people were experiencing. And learning other languages gave me more opportunities to understand the sensations, the worries, the hopes, the dreams of other people. And it just sort of expanded my portfolio of things like curiosity and wonder. And it also gave me the opportunity to realize that if the words I'm using are not effective, then go back and find another word. I'll hat tip to a gentleman who's in the comments, Donald Van Dyke. There's a book right over here on my desk he gave me for a gift. It's an etymology dictionary. I'm obsessed with the root origin of words. Why? Because over years and years and years, we've forgotten the true origin of the words we use. They get mishmashed and they get, co-opted. And a lot of times I will pause and tell people, do you mean what you're saying? So if you don't, and a lot of times we're just going fast and we say things. This is where AI gets really interesting. We'll talk about this in a minute, but go back to the origins of the words you're using. And it's amazing how people are like, you're right. I didn't actually mean that. I think I meant this. Great. We all have the opportunity. Welcome, Brandon. We all have the opportunity to pause and revisit what we're trying to say to get to the outcome we want. And that's where it gets really interesting with all the technology that we'll talk about here shortly.
Yeah, and I want to definitely. Hey, Brandon,
Hi, everybody. Sorry I'm late. I've been listening. I've just been sitting on the plane waiting to get off.
are you
So
sponsored by Delta? I like the little
I
logo
know.
right
Look at
on
that.
your shoulder there.
As soon as I turned on, I was like, "Look at that. Maybe we'll get a sponsorship out of this."
Bob isn't happy about that. Um,
Uh,
so yeah, I want to get into your specifics, Bill, of what you did specifically with Microsoft when you were rolling
Sure.
out Sales Copilot. But I want to hit. You mentioned Donald. I want to kind of hit his question maybe as a lead into this.
Sure.
Saying change management has always been, finding how to truly begin with the person, right? Figuring out how to get that hug. How do you believe AI is going to affect the ability to begin with the person? And I
Yeah.
think that would be a good tie-in
wow.
when you started to talk about what you did with Microsoft and the Copilot piece.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd love to hear your response to this, Christy, because your questions have really, got me thinking about that aspect of honing these skills, right? But yeah, let me just kind of set the scene for folks. So when I was at Microsoft in that role as director of change for commercial systems and business intelligence, we were rolling out the early tenets of what now the world knows as Copilot, specifically Sales Copilot. At the time, it was actually called something a little different. We called it Viva Sales. So many of you who use Microsoft Teams and know the Viva suite, it was attached to that. And if you can imagine, it was sort of these early stages of, hey, what are some things we could do that would give time back to sellers? And what's interesting, and I pulled up some stats to look at here, we learned that just recently they've refreshed these stats, but 79% of sellers around the world say that they could use more time freed up for them to spend on account development and relationship building. And what was even scarier was today, sellers spend 70% of their time on administrative tasks. So those things are like research, planning, keying in data to different systems, developing proposals, developing drafts, reviewing internal meetings, getting approvals. So if you do the math, that's nearly 30 hours a week that they're spending doing that. And that leaves basically, I don't know, less than 8 hours to go meet with a customer. That's problematic. And at Microsoft, they said, how do we flip that? How do we take all of those aspects and start to automate them, put some of the AI engine in there so that when Christy sends me an email, I can literally hit a button that syncs between the email and my CRM and updates all their contact information. I don't have to worry about doing that. Or more importantly, when Brandon sends me a note and says, hey, I've got this opportunity with Delta, I can go sync things based on what is existing in our CRMs. Have we done any previous business with them? Who's the last person that talked to them, right? These are all things that take a lot of time to find out. It's like putting a huge 1,000-piece puzzle together. And we started to realize with Viva Sales, now Sales Copilot, what if we just use the power of AI to do all that work so that we could free up sellers to go spend time with the people they want to spend time with, to go ideate, to go brainstorm. And over that process, it was really fascinating because I think at the time, these calls were typically engineers, product owners, developers. And then I would be the single change management person on those calls. These were global calls. And it was fascinating because oftentimes I would ask a question that the whole group would say, we didn't think of that at all. And it made the product better. Where I actually worked very closely with Carson was developing testimonials. I worked with sellers. I said, yes, go work on the product, but I'm going to spend time with the sellers. I'm going to understand what their day in the life is. I'm going to understand from them, hey, how would this tool help you? And Carson became one of my stars, one of my showcase people, because I did a testimonial with him, video, captured his sentiments. And then he became sort of the voice of the campaign I was putting together so that people would adopt this tool. And I was really excited that it finally got rolled out to 60,000 sellers across Microsoft. And that product in its infancy has now emerged to what is Sales Copilot that the world is starting to use. And those percentages of time that I mentioned before are getting sellers are getting that back to spend time with not only their customers, their accounts, but I would say more importantly, spend time with your families, spend time with your kids. Like if you can get all of that time back and it can be done for you, you don't have to spend time in an airport lounge keying in 90 things before you get on a plane, right? That's our life. We know that. We've done that. I'd like to work on things that free that up so that you can spend time with your loved ones.
So related to that, and this kind of touches on Bob's or comment here. He says
mhm.
the assumption is that they'll use that time for their family or their kids, but do statistics prove that they will? Question number one. Question number two, Bill, related to that is, does that need to be part of the change management process? Is that when people are changing and I have free time,
Yeah.
what the hell do I do with that? Right.
Yeah.
And to find out it's actually okay that I spend more time with my family or whatever.
Or that management doesn't just fill that time up with a different task.
Yes.
I mean,
Right, a
that's
different
probably
admin
more
task.
likely. Yeah,
Yeah.
now we're going to give you something else to do, but we're still not being more productive.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll finish this point, and then I'd love, Christy, for you to share your thoughts here, because as we're building upon it, I can see the light bulbs going off and you over behind the cicadas. That being, what's really interesting is this is impacting people's livelihoods. And what I mean by that is we've all spent, and many people have been successful in their careers because they've become corporate heroes. They're the heroes at doing all that swiveling and keying and doing things and making this incredible amount of work somehow appear seamless. And what happens, to your point, Brandon, when all of a sudden it maybe used to take you 6 hours a week to do a spreadsheet that now can be done in a matter of seconds and sent off to someone else? What do you do with that 6 hours? Even more important, how do you have the conversation with your manager to say, hey, Brandon, I now have all this extra time. Can we go revisit that list of things we've always wanted to achieve, the innovation list, the to-dos that we never get to? Can we start on that? I would pose the question that, is the manager ready to have that conversation? That's the part where I find really spending an interesting amount of time. Christy, I'd love your thoughts as we talk about this.
Yeah, I've got several. One is a follow-up to something we already mentioned, is if we give the sellers back that much time, do we now need fewer sellers?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So like that's where I think this fear factor comes in with sales professionals is, sure, if we add all this efficiency, then again, they don't need 20 of me, they maybe only need 12 of me. So I think that's causing some of that fear. I've said for a long time, because I'm a big CRM junkie, but I also will throw the sales leaders into this mix.
Yes.
Which is, I've always said, like, I should be able to manage 70 to 75% of my team, the pipeline, if you will, through technology. Right. I shouldn't have to go and, if I'm doing a one-on-one or a pipeline review, I should already, again, like everything should be, triggers should be set, information should be pushed to me. I shouldn't have to go track a seller down and go, tell me what's going on with this account. Right. Like it's all there for the taking. And now you've got things like Gong. Now you've got all of that type of thing. So for me, also the efficiencies of the automation that's brought to the table, the software for the leaders, so that, by the way, personally, I'd like to see them use that time to coach as opposed to manage, right? So again, I get crabby about this, like 4 hats that people wear in the sales leadership world: leadership, which is different than management, which is different than coaching, which is different than mentoring. And I don't think we're doing anywhere near. So I would like to say, if you're going to be able to free up that kind of time, again, you got administrative tasks for the sellers, then why don't we spend that time teaching the art of sales, which the guys know I'm already on. I've been on my soapbox on for a while. Let's go back to teaching true sales skills. Let's go back to the art of sales. Now you've got time. Where should you spend it, Bill? With the people, right? Trying to help improve the people. So I think, and then the other thing I would say is, so many sales professionals that I interview are not getting professional sales training, whether that be no matter what, however you want to define that, but for professional development, professional sales training. I think AI can be very beneficial. So, my follow-up question to that, when they say I've not had any formal sales training, is, so great, what have you done for yourself? How have you helped yourself? And I think that's where a lot of AI can come in. Again, if your company has invested in some of those tools like a Gong, things like that, well, you should be self-coaching, right? Or you should be listening to podcasts. You should be going out and, and aggregating and saying, where can I get information about this type thing? There's so many places out there. So I don't know that everybody, I feel like a lot of times I get a newsletter every morning from a guy, and he is really good about giving us AI prompts. He's like, hey, I was looking for this and I used this prompt and it worked really well. And here's how I refined it down to this. And I thought if I would benefit from it, you would too. I don't feel like there's enough of that collaboration going on out in the world either. AI, I still think it's a little bit scary for people, and they don't know, like, what is the right, some people don't even know what a prompt is, right?
Truly, yeah. I think to your point also that was asked about the creativity piece, I think Bob asked that question. One of the things I would encourage people to do, this goes back to the question that we were saying, you and Brandon, you and I were saying, which is like, how do we have that conversation with our sales leader and our managers? Which is, when we think about innovation, and everybody wants to do innovative things, that requires creativity. That requires daydreaming. That requires going for a walk by a large body of water. That doesn't require you standing in front of your computer 14 hours a day. And so I think we have to be comfortable to not wait for permission to do these things. And that's your point, Christy, as well. People are sending out these prompts and saying, this worked really well for me. There's this, collection of use cases that are happening across the ecosystem to get the results that people want. The fascinating thing about AI, though, and some of the tools that people use, especially on the creative side, if all four of us type in the same prompt into Copilot, into ChatGPT, into other things, the same exact words, all four of us will get 4 different results. And that kind of makes people go, why? Shouldn't we get the same thing? Not necessarily, and that's the power of it, right? I had this test when I led a webinar for Microsoft alumni, and I gave them the prompt, and I had them type. It was very simple. It was create an image of a robot painting a self-portrait of themselves in an art studio, and then I had them just sort of screenshot and put in the chat, and every single one was different. And they said, "Why is that?" And I said, "That's kind of the art and the beauty of this whole thing, right? We don't understand it the minute we think we do." And I think it brings so much curiosity and questions to people. It's a change issue. It's a humanity issue, is what I would say. And, I remember back in the days when I was in consulting and I was going to all these sales trainings, and I struggled with it because I felt like, this isn't my forte. But Christy, where I had a mentor that came to me and said, Bill, you're thinking about it all wrong. Don't think of it as selling. Think of it as helping. And I said, oh, that's a game changer. I could do that. And they said, great. Don't ever say the word sell. Don't ever say the word proposal. Just say, how can I help? And then the rest of it will follow. So to me, that's where, if I can spend more time asking people, how can I help? Making them feel less alone in the world and helping them achieve their dreams and outcomes, like, I'm good. Sign me up.
I love that.
So I want to reiterate something, Bill, because I think we've touched on it, but I think it's super important if I look into the world of change management as we go forward, in particular with AI, right? AI is going to change your job, or if it doesn't directly change your job, it's going to provide an opportunity for you to change your job. Do you think that the change management that is required by somebody like yourself or an organization is 70% on helping the person understand how their job is changing, or how they're versus just changing the use of the technology and how to use the AI? And because that's what I think.
Yeah.
I think that AI, it's like people say, well, you have the major internet and you had mobile phones and AI, right? Mobile phones or mobile was just a different way of a different device of doing a lot of the same things we were already doing. But
Yeah.
this isn't. This is very different. And so it is going to change the job. Where do you see that change management really needing to be focused?
I think it's more like 90-10, honestly,
Okay.
Tom. I
Okay.
mean, to me, we're on the eve of what I think next week or the week after, Apple's going to do their WWDC, right? And there's all these rumors about how this stuff is going to be right in the phone and it's going to change everything. I personally think this technology is teaching us more about who we are than we've ever done before, because it really does test us in a way to say what is human versus what is generated, what is believable versus what should be questioned, what can be trusted versus what is disinformation and misinformation. All of this is happening at such a pace, and it's happening in every sector of our life. So I personally believe the change management is more 90% on the humanity of this and 10% on the tools and technology. Brandon, I think you wanted to jump in.
Well, no, I mean, I'm trying to formulate the question and then the comment there. I think I agree with you, and then is my concern. And so, like, I've been wearing my CEO hat in my company,
Mm-hmm.
and as we're growing and hiring people and doing all that, and I've been very, very focused on culture my whole career. I'm like you, very empathetic. Learned that in childhood, all of that. But what I see a lot of times, especially in moments where I've done more consulting work and talk with other CEOs and like, well, how did you do this? How did you that? When I start getting into that empathy and actually genuinely caring for people, they just would like, floop. It's like they wanted
Yeah,
the outcome, but they didn't
sure.
want to actually genuinely care about their people that much. And what I hear you saying is 90% of it is about the people and about our humanity. And we are at a pivotal point of trying to help people understand themselves better. It's like collectively, globally, we all need to go to therapy together in order to take on this AI thing, because we got to know
Yep.
ourselves better to lead ourselves better. And that's where my
Yep.
biggest fear is right now, is that we humans don't do that well, and we don't want to do that well. And a lot of managers and leaders don't want to create that culture for their companies because they see it as light and fluffy or not important, or go do that on your own time. And I think that's going to be a big, big challenge right now.
Yeah.
I'm going to jump in here.
Please
Go ahead.
Christy.
Bill, you haven't mentioned this yet, but and I'm a big Brene Brown fan, but I suspect that you are as well. You just haven't said so. But when you talk about so a couple of things you said like took me to Brene right away. One, innovation and creativity has to come from a place of vulnerability. And so, Brandon, to your point, and again, like as someone who is dating, one of the first questions I ask men is in a roundabout way, have you done your work? Right? Because I've done my work. And I
Have you
know.
owned your shit, huh, Christy?
Have you owned your own shit and done your work? Right. Yeah.
Does that
But
disqualify a lot of people right away?
it disqualifies a lot of people right away, actually,
Yeah.
Tom. Yeah. Because my favorite response is, what does that mean? So then I know then I know we're disconnected, right? It's
Yeah.
like if right away I know if we're in the same ballpark or not. But it's that again, like so, Brene Brown also describes empathy versus sympathy, right, as two
Yes.
very different things. And I love the analogy she uses, and she says, you're walking along and someone has fallen down into a hole, right? You fall into the well, and you're like, hey, what's going on down there? And you're like, I fell into the hole. Well, that sucks, right? Sympathy is saying that sucks. Empathy is getting down with them, right? Going into the hole to help them out, as opposed to just yelling from the top, sucks to be down there in the hole, doesn't it? Right. And so, she says, that, me too, right? It's the me too. It's like, hey, I've had that happen too. This is how I feel about it. But when you talked about innovation and creativity, and then Raymond, what you said, I'm like, well, all that we're talking about and asking people to do comes from a place of vulnerability.
Yeah.
Right. And then the fear around being vulnerable at work. Right. And the fear of saying, hey, I'm worried about this AI thing. I'm worried about my job. I'm worried about how I'm going to feed my family. All of that comes from a place of vulnerability that not everybody's comfortable going to.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think
Christy,
one of sorry, I was just going to mention really quick. This is exactly why in my dream world, Chrissy, like I would have corporations read Atlas of the Heart, right? By Brene Brown. Now I know that's not going to happen, but to the best of my ability, I sort of surreptitiously weave all of what you've said into my work. For people, to your point, Brandon, sometimes they glaze over and they're like, this is not my thing. Okay, great. No problem. I will find another way to get the tenets of what I'm saying into the work that we're doing. Not everybody's a Brene Brown fan. Don't need to be. But I think at the core of who we all are, nobody wants to be lonely. People want to make sure that they take care of their loved ones and they want to leave a legacy in this world. I really think that's what it comes down to. And those are indisputable.
I want to bring that. I love this conversation. By the way, I'm so glad they let me off the plane. It when we talk about LinkedIn, we talk about social selling, and you guys know I hate the word social selling, but when we think about LinkedIn in general, the people that do it better than others are the ones who, Christy, own their shit. They've done the work. They know who they are. They've got good clarity on who they are so that they could say, this is me authentically. And because if not, and we talked about this, I led a workshop yesterday with the team. And when you get to that point in these workshops, I never know where it's going to go. Right. And there's usually one person in there with their arms folded and they're like, business and personal, they shall never meet in the middle. And, business is business and personal is personal. And I always go, bullshit. Business has never been business and personal has never just been personal. Business has always been personal to me and to most people that are very successful at it, because you can't separate your humanity from your job. And I think that we're with like the term imposter syndrome. I think the only reason I posted about this a lot lately, it's been coming up a lot. The only reason we even have this term imposter syndrome is because people are uncomfortable in their own skin.
Yeah.
And now it's just going to magnify with all these different tools. So let's say you've got a Gong or a Fathom or something that's recording calls for salespeople, and you start getting these AI analysis of it. What are you going to see? You're going to start being able to see some of that stuff. Are you empowered by your company? Are you empowered in the culture? And do you have the courage to start looking at this stuff going, okay, well, that's really who I am. How do I move this forward? How do I take myself to the next level in order to be more successful?
And am I willing to change? And if it feels hard, am I willing to ask for help? Again, to your point, like that's why in this world, I'm very fortunate. I know I'm going to be gainfully employed for quite a while because there will be no AI bot that will ever replace empathy. I'm not
Mhm.
worried.
So let's look ahead. And Bill, I have a software company. We were talking beforehand. I have a software company that sells to manufacturers and wholesale distributors, which are not the most technical people in the world, right? And they're getting hit right now with the whole digital transformation, which is in a lot of these companies, they're still using spreadsheets and email to do everything,
Yeah.
combined with AI, right? All at the same time to kind of, you talk about the super perfect storm, I guess, of change that's going on. And one of the questions that I get a lot, and I'm taking a lot of notes here because one of the things I know that we've natively done well is provide that empathy, right? We really
Mhm.
help them, and I didn't know what we were doing, but that's what we were doing really well, and I think we can do more of it. But one of the questions that we get a lot is, what is the world going to look like in 2 years, 5 years? As a sales professional, right? And
Yeah.
the people I work with are people that are going to job sites and construction projects, but you're still relationship, you're still selling, so what do you think it's going to look like? Where do you think we're going to be with AI, and what is the sales world going to look like in the next 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, whatever?
Yeah, I love this question because I'm able to reflect and also project. I would love to be a futurist. Whoever gets those jobs as futurists on their business cards, like I'd love to know who they are and how they got those jobs. But I'll give you an example. And so folks know, I've been through the entire history of CRMs and sales, like from Siebel to Oracle to NetSuite to Salesforce to Dynamics to all of it. I've been through it all. And and what was really interesting about that whole evolution was every time you met with a seller and you realized that they had the opportunity, someone gave them the opportunity to get out from behind the system and spend time with a customer, they ran at the chance. I think the future of sales looks a little like this, and I'm going to give a specific industry example for you, Tom, because it might relate. I supported a lot of agricultural lending clients in the past, right? These are people who are lending loans to farmers across this country. And I learned so much in that time because now I have a true appreciation for farm to table, right?
Hmm.
And when I think about how you sell to that very unique set of people, it's cultural, it's trustworthy, it's you have to show up. And what was really interesting was when we had this opportunity to say, hey, you can do all these digital signatures and you don't actually have to get in the car and go out to meet the customer. A lot of people came back and said, don't take that away from me. That's important to me. Give me the technology to enable to do other things, but do not take that interaction away from me. So if I think about that example in the future, it looks a little bit like this. There's a drone that the farmer might use or a seller might say, hey, you can use this drone. It goes up, it assesses the entire farmland, it takes pictures of all the things they need, it does the acreage, the hectares, all that other stuff, does all that work that typically takes a lot of time, puts that into a system, does calculations based on what's in the market, based on the bank, based on the savings, based on the interest rates, does all that stuff for them. That's a lot of time that's been saved. And then it says, hey, why don't you just spend time going out to the farm, visiting with the farmer, getting to know his family, talking about the next generation of who's going to own the farm, what they need, and let's have the conversation there. And what you're selling is potential. What you're selling is the next generation. You're not selling for the problem today. That small example, because we enabled it with digital technology, because we put things in the hands of people, we gave them back time and we said, how would you like to use your time? And they told us. Nothing came close to that relationship every single time. And I think if you do that in manufacturing, if you do that in warehousing, if you do that, all of this stuff can help with sensors and pictures. And I can pull up my phone, take a picture of something that's sitting on a pallet and say, how do I move this or sell this or whatever? And it tells me now, right? that's great. Like now I get to have different time allocation and conversations. To me, that brings me a lot of joy and hope and creativity. It goes back to what Bob said. Everyone is creative. Everyone is highly creative. We just have to be given reasons and permission and belief to spend it there.
Well, and I think related to what, Bob was saying, not everyone is creative, but I think everyone, if again, guided and provide empathy, could find a better way of using their time in their job and their role, right? Whether it's creativity or just building more relationships and so forth. I agree. The question I get a lot is, well, is my job going to go away, right, with AI? I think there will be some jobs that go away because they're just going to be redundant with AI. But what I tell people mostly is, no, AI is going to make you a better version of what you hired came on to be, right? And some people won't. Some people probably won't make it. Some people won't really have the ability to be that better version. But if you really start to think out of the box, boy, there's a long way you could go. Not just in that time that you were talking about, but just in the overall value you're providing in the sales role.
And you can't be afraid. I mean, I think the people that are asking that question are probably also the people that have a fear of the technology. Like they're not trying to educate themselves. They're not, I jumped on that chat GPT thing right away, became a paid version right away, as soon as I could. And I'm, again, like, I still feel like I'm scratching the surface, but I'm not afraid of it. I want to better understand it. Right. And then I want to better understand, again, like Brandon, you mentioned Fathom. Like that was life-changing for me when I finally, I'm an old school girl. I'm a pencil and paper girl. Every client has its own notebook with its own color. And I love taking notes, but I also send a follow-up email every time I talk to somebody. Right. And I'm doing that a lot faster. Right. I still this is still who I am at the core, but I'm using that Fathom to take that summary, copy paste that into my CRM system, use that as my follow-up email. And, and again, that gives me time to do other things with my family. I mean, I like exercise is important to me. That gives me more time to, to do cardio. But I think if you're fearing it and you're afraid it's going to take your job and you're also not trying to educate yourself, that probably is a recipe for disaster in the future.
Yeah. And I would say,
go ahead, Brandon.
Thanks. There's a lot of it depends on the way that we frame it to people too, and be able to cast that vision for them. And here's the example. So the workshop I led yesterday, I've led lots of these workshops before. Prior to AI, it was sitting down with people trying to encourage, motivate, cast vision as to why it was valuable for them to take the time to figure out how to write a social post. Right? That's really hard for most people. You sit there and go, I don't know what to write. I don't know what to write. So a lot of it was that coaching, the motivation, the encouragement, the attaboy, attagirl, you can do it and believe in da da da. And now that shifted because of AI, because of things like our digital twins that we built on top of OpenAI. And so now I was able to work with them on, why is this social content important for you as a salesperson? Didn't have to spend so much time on you can do it, because then I said, all right, hey, let's go take your transcripts from your call. We went in and pre-trained a twin, and then we take their transcripts, we run in and we go, okay, here's the buttons you can create, which the buttons are prompts. We just, fabricated prompts for them so they didn't have to think about it. And go, how many do you want? Oh, you want 3 social posts out of it? We turned a 1-hour conversation with the customer into 5 social posts and a LinkedIn blog article in a matter of minutes. And now all they had to do was go and edit a few things. And it's not so much that it saved them time, because they weren't doing it before, because without the AI, it was so overwhelming to them that they would just go, oh yeah, LinkedIn doesn't work, or, all the other reasons to not do it. And now yesterday I had a group of people that I hadn't experienced in a long time in a workshop, where we're coming out of it and they actually liked me. We went to dinner. They weren't they weren't scared of me, because I'm the guy that's trying to force them to do something that they're so scared to do, which is write something for public consumption.
Yeah.
Brandon, do you think you got to spend more time yesterday on the why versus the how as the result of that in the workshop?
Absolutely. And they asked a lot more questions that were more forward thinking, where in the past, a lot of the questions were still try to convince me, let me throw this roadblock in front of Brandon because I don't really want to do it. And it wasn't that they didn't want the outcomes of it. It scared them to death to create content. And I mean, you can get into the Brené Brown stuff too. People don't want to be vulnerable. Like, what if I post something and no one cares? Like, I used to say, well, you are going to post stuff and no one will care.
Yeah.
That's just part of the process. That's why it's not a one and done type of thing. But this way it was, hey, what if I told you that you could have this, this, and that, and it would be lightweight and easy for you. And then we could get excited. And then I showed them how to do it. And they're all like kicking out 3, 4, 5 different posts, like, oh my gosh, this is really cool. And now they're excited.
The posts that I've posted on social that have gotten the most attention have almost all revolved around my son and the things that my son and I do, because we're huge sports junkies and we're big Jayhawk fans, as most of you know. And so like when I post things about us being, like, hey, like we got bowl eligible. We were at the game where we became bowl eligible, which is a big deal if you're a KU football fan. But I mean, like those things. And again, I always try to tie it back to business just because that's just kind of how my brain works. But in general, I think wouldn't have even had to have done that. And I think, Bill, goes back to everything you've been saying today, which is people want a human connection with other humans. And, I'm not somebody who talks openly a lot about my personal life. My son's now an adult. He's now of an age where I don't have a problem posting him. Before, I would have never done that. But it gives them a little glimpse into how I spend my off hours, what I'm passionate about, what I care about, and I spend a lot of time with my son during basketball and football season. And I think that resonates with people. To your point, I think people are like, wow, like it seems like maybe I work 70 hours a week, but that's actually not the case.
Yeah. One of my proudest moments when I was in consulting over the course of 20 years was when a client, a CIO, I was in the middle of briefing all the deliverables and he cut me off and he said, yeah, we'll get to that. Tell me about you. Where did you grow up? How were you raised? What's important to you? What are your values? What are your convictions? And I was like, what does this have to do with the SOW, right? And at the end of it, he said, we'll get back to that. We'll get back to that. I did all that. He got to know me a little bit. I finished my brief. He said, your brief was great anyway. It was, A's across the board. What I really want to ask you is, will you mentor my son? I mean, how do you put that in your performance review? Like, how do I go back and say, this is noteworthy? And to me, that's those memorable moments. And so if things like AI and all that other stuff helps us get to a place where we can have those bridges, I'm all for it.
Love that. Yeah.
And as we wrap up here, I want to hit Kathy's comment, and then I have one final question for you, Bill, based on something you mentioned earlier, because it's something that's been going through my head. But first of all, Kathy said she's got 10 hours back and is spending more time on strategic partnerships. So that's working. And then she had a second follow-up question here, which I think is really good. She's talking about it, and I assume she works at Microsoft. She's saying they're discussing how leaders need to be prepared how to teach people how to use the extra time. We must be ready for it when it works and not assume people will be more productive. What will this really do to your workforce? How do sales leaders get in front of this effectively? I know we've touched on this before, but boy, it seems like that's going to be the biggest change management challenge.
It is.
Because
it is. And the way sales leaders get effective, get in front of it, is they have to have thought about it. Like there's nothing worse than standing in front of a group of people and being like, I think you should do this, when you yourself as a leader have not formed your own stance, belief, and position on it. So sales leaders, you have to literally go take a long walk and think about this stuff. Literally, that's it. Like, get away from the computer, get away from the tools, think about this stuff. How is it going to change you, the way you interact, your interactions with customers, partners, teams, and then start from a place of vulnerability like we've all been discussing, and then do it together. Like, nobody has the perfect answer on this. There's no textbook for this. We'll do it together.
This reminds me of the data and the research on 4-day work weeks. I mean, a ton of data that says 4 days is more productive than 5 days. But we generally across the board are unable to hear that, because I think it just scares the hell out of us to think we're only going to work 4 days instead of 5 days. And I think the same foundation is the same. We're using AI to help us streamline, get back time. Kathy's got 10 hours back, but we don't trust our people to use that wisely in order to just give it back to them, or even trust them to train them how to try and use it wisely. Like we're not comfortable overall as a culture with allowing our people to have critical thinking for themselves versus us just telling them what to do and when to do it. That sound fair?
Totally.
Fair judgment? I don't know if that makes sense.
I
Fair
think I see this a lot in sales. I wrote a post a while back that, stop scripting, like stop scripting calls. These calls, like, hey, sales leaders, stop scripting calls. Right? I call it checking your brain at the door. Right? I mean, we don't want we don't want our employees walking through the door checking their brain, thinking that everything is we just have to follow the form. As long as we follow the formula, we don't want a society of people who check their brain at the door. And so what I tell people when I teach, I said, yes, I have to give you something in order to put you on the phone for the very first time, right? You will freak out if I don't give you some sort of format, but I'm going to give you an outline, right? I'm going to give you an outline of, we're going to do, for a live call, we're going to do an introduction. We're going to ask our qualification questions. We're going to do a transition statement that says, yes, based on what you've told me that we should talk again, or no, based on what you told me we shouldn't talk again. And then we're going to give the CTA, and within there, and then I go, and then why don't you go write something that sounds like you?
Yes.
And I think, I can't remember who I was talking to the other day, but I'm now asking for writing samples from sales candidates, because I'm freaked out that, that text talk, as I call it, because my son's, my son's famous line is, "Mom, that was not a call, that was a text. Like, stop doing that." He says it to me all the time, "Mom, that was a text." But the text talk, he sent me something from my nephew who is 13, and the two of them were communicating 2 days ago, and my son said something to him, and he just came back with FR. And my son sent it to me. He thought it was hilarious. He's like, "This is hilarious." I go, "Well, it would be probably more funny if I knew what FR is." Right. And I was like, and he goes, "Never mind." He was so deflated. He's like, "Never mind. Like, you missed the punchline." But I'm afraid, I mean, like those writing skills, like I've never, I mean, I've been a sales leader or a consultant for 24 years. Until the last year, I've never asked for writing samples.
Yeah. Probably one of the greatest skills you can have nowadays, right?
It is. As a journalism major, I definitely give it the emphasis that it needs in my own world. But, as we get more reliant on those kind of things, like I need to know that you can actually write, that that ChatGPT is not going to be your writing partner.
Yeah,
that's right.
So Bill, as we wrap up here, one final question, and thank you this has been awesome. Some great conversation with the comments. You mentioned the Apple developer conference happening later this month. And I think we're going to learn, whether it's right away or very soon, our phones are going to be our own large language models, our own AI devices. And I was talking to my wife about this, and I watched her get very nervous about this. Do you think that we have a big change management exercise on our hands as it relates to our personal devices and the things like our phone, and how they're going to look and feel and operate in the next year, maybe?
Yeah, absolutely. I do. I mean, think about it. These have become our logical extension of our appendages. I would argue that probably everyone on this call, your phone is within reach when you're sleeping, no matter where you are, when you're in the car. So to answer your question, Tom, I do think it is going to completely change our lives when this thing that has become a digital appendage of us has all the knowledge of the world ever written at your fingertips.
Well, and yourself. Right? Yourself.
Yeah.
You talk about knowing yourself. It's going to know more about you than you know about yourself.
That's right. That's right. Every habit, think about it. I wear the Aura ring. It's got all that stuff in there. So this brings up the questions. Again, we're going to learn more about ourselves and who we are because of this technology than we ever thought possible. And some people are going to say, "I don't want it. I don't need this. I'm going to set barriers. I'm going to disengage." I was on a podcast a couple weeks ago. Somebody said, "Could this go really, really wrong?" And I said, it might. We might all decide that we're going to take huge leaps back to get back to our humanity. That's very possible. And when that happens, you know where to find me.
All right. Well, Bill, if somebody wants to find you, where can they connect with you? I assume on LinkedIn?
Definitely on LinkedIn. So just look up Bill Kirst. I'm pretty prolific there. I'm also on Instagram. I did write a book called Everword. It's a poetry collection. When I think about our humanity, I decided to start writing poetry many, many years ago, and I decided to publish this being my first one because I think poetry is one place where we will always have our humanity. So you can look that up. But yeah, that's probably the best place to find me. And I'm happy to reach out and connect with anyone. You can tell I'm passionate about this topic, and thanks for having me on today.
Great. And Christy, thank you for sitting in for Carson. You did an awesome job.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, definitely. And Brandon, I'm glad you were able to fly in for us.
Thanks, Brandon.
Sponsored by.
Yeah, sponsored by,
Yeah.
by Delta there.
Just
All
don't
right.
tell Bob.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right,
Bill,
well,
that was excellent today. Thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, you bet.
And Christy, I'm so excited. You're going to be our ongoing guest host.
I love it. Yeah. And more
Yeah.
more good conversations with Bill. Like these kind of conversations. I love these. This was
Carson's
perfect
going
for
to get
me.
jealous and he's going to want to come more often.
Nice.
He'll be
Yeah,
back
I
from
know.
we may
vacation,
not let him come back after his Caribbean trip.
We'll just have him as a guest.
Yeah.
There you go.
All right.
Sounds good.
Brandon, you want to wrap us up?
Sure. Thank you, everybody, for joining us again. And real quick on the podcast, if you love what you're hearing, we would really appreciate the 5 stars on there, or snap a picture of it, share it with a friend. And other than that, thank you so much for joining us at Mastering Modern Selling.